So I've got a simple scene set up here. At the very end of the video, I'll show you how I set up the particulars of this, but basically we have a torus in an environment here. So let's go ahead and go into our window, Redshift render view. I'm going to dock this over here. Of course, if you need to go in here to your render settings and make sure we're in here under Redshift for our renderer, and I can go ahead and hit this IPR button. And then now as we make changes, we'll see it update in the render view. Now what we're going to be talking about is up here underneath Extension, Substance Engine, Substance Asset Manager. So this is what we're going to be bringing in our substances into Cinema 4D, and we have to ask ourselves, what is a substance? If you're familiar with Substance Designer or Substance Painter, I do have, they're a little bit older, but a Substance Designer Quickstart and a Substance Painter Quickstart on my YouTube channel. I can link that in the description. But basically I can go in here to File, I'm in Substance Painter right now. I can go here to File, Open Sample. We'll go in here to the tiling material. I'm going to grab all these layers in here, and I'm going to delete these out of here. And you can see I have a bunch of materials in here. There's smart materials, and then there's just regular materials. So I can go through here, and I can look up things like brick, and I can say drop a brick wall on here. And this will tile this brick wall substance as a fill layer onto our object. If I scroll down, you're going to see I have a bunch of attributes in here, so I can change, you know, the color of brick A and brick B. I can go down here and crank up like cement damage and water level, whatever the person who built this material included as parameters for the end user to mess with. It's all in here. You can even turn on paint as true or false. We can change the paint color, all the cool stuff you've come to expect from a substance material. Now let's say I want to take this material into Cinema 4D. I could go in here and say File, Export Textures, and then under the default material, you'll see it'll export a base color, height, roughness, metallic, etc. that you could plug these textures into. You know, depending on all the changes you've made here, you could just export those as textures and plug them in. However, if you did want to go back and say, oh, I wish the paint color was different, I wish the paint wear was more or less, we want that functionality in our external program, and we can do that. One caveat I would make to this is if I'm going to want to mess with this substance, I would want to export the substance. However, remember, if you go in here to Grunge and turn off material, and we say like Grunge print, we do have a ton of grunges in here. So if I ever did want to, I'm going to go ahead and make another fill layer in here. So here on the base color, I'm just going to drag this grunge fingerprint onto that base color. If I did want to export just this grunge texture, as opposed to the SBSAR file, which would be the substance file that creates this grunge. In that case, you could go in here, and I would suggest maybe doing like a file export textures, go into default, turn off everything except for the base color, and then under global settings, maybe say, you know, let's export this as a 2048, tell it where to go. I can just select this folder, say export, open output directory. And now in here, you're going to see we have our default material base color, and that is just a giant grunge map that you could then drag in to your material in Cinema 4D. But what we're going to be talking about today, again, I'll go back here to brick, or again, this could be any material you want to export in here. In fact, if you want more materials, you can click this little button here. This is browsing the 3D assets in the marketplace. So you can go over here. You do a search for brick, and then there will be a ton of brick materials you can choose from. Of course, there's a lot of different categories in here. So if you did want to send one over, like excavated rocks ground, I could say send to, and I could send it to Substance Painter. And that'll go ahead and say it's sent. And then if you go back over here into Substance, you're going to see our new excavated rocks ground is indeed in Substance. Or alternatively, I'll scroll down here to like a marbled rocky terrain. You can just hit this download button. And then if you go to your download folder, you'll see you have SBSARs in here. I'm going to go ahead and copy these, or copy this one into where I'm working. There we go. So now I've got that SBSAR in there. So you can get it from here, or if you want to take them directly out of Painter, if you sent them to Painter, just browse to the one you like, right click, say export resource, select the folder, and that'll go ahead and drop that SBSAR from Painter into that folder. So now that we've got our substance archive files, the SBSAR files in the folder that we want, all we got to do is get them into Cinema 4D. So let's go ahead and again, that's under Extensions, Substance Engine, Substance Asset Manager, and you can go in here to File, Load Substance, go to the folder where they're at. I'm going to go ahead and just grab this Cartagena brick wall. So we'll go ahead and double click that. That'll go ahead and create a material. And in order to see that, let's go in here to Window, Material Manager. So there we go. We can just click and drag that onto our object here, and it'll go ahead and texture it for us. But I want to make sure this is a Redshift material. So I'm going to select this material, go in here, say Material, Tools, Convert and Replace. So now when I double click this material, that'll bring up the node editor that you're probably used to by now. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up a little bit. You're going to see this is what it's done for us. Now, you could create a Redshift material, and then using the extensions, Substance Engine, Substance Asset Manager, you can literally just drag and drop this into a graph, and it'll go ahead and create this for you. But it went ahead and made the material, and we applied it to our object, and this is what we have now. So let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit. So I'm going to move this displacement down here. I'm going to take our diffuse texture stuff and just put it up top. Our bump map down, and I'm going to move our material and our output node over a little bit, give us some breathing room. And this is going to come up later, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the purple displacement node, I'm going to take the purple bump map node, I'm going to put these over here to the right, because if I want to end up doing a triplanar node, I want them to kind of sit here. So here, if we click on this one, you're going to see this is our texture. So we have our reflection and our diffuse, and then our roughness texture and our normal texture, which is actually back here, and then our height for our displacement is being piped in, but it's not really a texture. It's actually, if we click this down, you're going to see this is an asset. It's bringing in the SBSAR file and turning that into a texture, which is then being plugged into our material, and that's super powerful. Let me show you why. So one example is if I just zoom in here, you're going to see it's a little bit low res. You can see it's a little, let's go into the top here. You can see how it's kind of pixelated on here. So instead of going through, and exporting a high res texture and importing it and plugging it in, what you can do is you can just click on this shader node, go down here to the diffuse Cinema 4D shader. You can see there's a shader section, expand that, go down here to asset, expand that. And now you're going to see all of those properties of whoever built this original material and expose these parameters to the end user. You can go in and change those. So I'm going to change my texture size from 256 to say 1024. You're going to see we got more resolution here. Turn down my area light just a bit. There we go. And then just like when we were in Substance Painter, we can go through here and change any of these options that we want. So we can change this to be like a darker, brick color 1. You can go in and change brick color 2, brick color 3, the sealer color, if we want it darker grout or we want lighter grout, we can go in and change that. You can do concrete on or off, so if you want like spray, that kind of overspray look for your bricks, you can do that. And in fact, you can even change the spreads. You can just change this up or down in the slider. Brick amount, brick offset, all that stuff. Now, if we double click this node, or double click that material to get into our node graph, that's the exact same parameters I was changing when I was in here. If you just, go ahead and expand all of these, and everything that you need is right there. But it's also, I just wanted to show you that it's in the material as well. All packed under that diffuse Cinema 4D shader. You can go in and change those parameters. Now, there's one thing that's not showing up, and that is our displacement texture. It's all plugged in. Everything's working right as far as how our node graphs are. But there is one more thing I need to do. So whatever my displacement is being applied to, in this case, it's the torus. Go ahead and select that torus, right click it, go into render tags, and it's just cut off a little bit, but there's the Redshift object tag. So select that tag, and underneath geometry, we're going to say override, turn on tessellation and turn on displacement. And now our displacement will show up. So in order to make that a little bit more obvious, I can crank this up to like 3, and there we go. We're getting some really heavy displacement on there. Of course, you can go through here and you can change this to 0.5 or 0.2 or whatever is going to look good for your asset, but I'll go ahead and leave that at 1. And if you wanted to do like a triplanar node, you can go in here, you can hit Shift C, type in triplanar, drag that onto our node graph here. You can also hit Tab, and that'll shoot you over here to find nodes, and you can type it in over there as well. So now that we have this, we have our diffuse texture. I'm just going to plug this into the little blue part. I'm going to tell it go into the texture image X. And the reason I'm doing that is I want one texture to go over the X, Y, and Z of the triplanar, and that's on by default. So if I plug it into X, it's going to say same image on each axis, which is what I do want. If I want to see what's going on here, I can go in here to Tools, Connect Node to Output, which I have a hotkey for that, which is Shift V. So if I just want to see what the triplanar is doing and hit Shift V, that's going to connect that to the output, and then I can see what's going on here. And if I want to open up the coordinates section, you're going to see we have scale in here. And if I wanted to change the scale, I have to change 3 numbers. If I'm just doing uniform scale, an easier way to do that is just go down here to Math, Constant, drag that out, and then I'm going to plug this into my triplanar. Before I do that, underneath triplanar, the default scale is 0.01. So if I want to maintain that, I'm just going to set this value to 0.01 for this constant node. And then I'm going to plug this into the triplanar node under texture, under coordinates, scale. And now I just have to change this number to change my scale on X, Y, and Z. So I can go through here and say 0.02 or 0.008, whatever value you want to plug in here. Now, of course, any changes I make to this triplanar node, I want to change on my reflection roughness, bump, and displacement as well. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to take the RS material, hit Shift V, so I can plug that into my surface again. And then now I have my diffuse texture going to a triplanar node and a constant controlling the scale. However, it's not going onto my object. I have to go from the triplanar and replace that diffuse texture with my new triplanar. And you're going to see again that diffuse isn't matched up with the other maps. It's pretty easy to fix. So hold down Control and drag out a copy of your triplanar. And then for each of these, I'm going to take the, in this case, the reflection out color into image X, and then plug that into my reflection color. Control drag out another copy of the triplanar. Same deal here. Image X to reflection roughness. Drag out a copy. This is going to be our normal map into the input. And on this one, I have the bump node and the displacement node between the material and the output here. And in fact, let's scoot this over here. So really, I'm just taking the texture nodes and plugging those into the triplanar nodes. I'm going to drag this one out. And again, the displacement texture, not the displacement node over here, I'm going to take that into image X and plug that into my displacement node. And the displacement node, just in case you didn't notice, skips the material node and goes right to the output. Now you're going to see things aren't still matched up. It's because this is controlling the scale for the diffuse, but not the other nodes. So let's go ahead and plug this one in to control the scale for all of the images. So I can go back up here and we can put this down to, say, 0.005, and they'll all update all at once. One thing I forgot to mention is under the triplanar, if you did want to go through here and rotate, you could do that on a per triplanar basis. If you want to rotate them all at once, go in here to Vector ABS, drag this out, and then this will give us our 3 values we're looking for. So X, Y, and Z for our rotation. So we're going to drag this into this triplanar and go in here to coordinates and just hit that under our rotation. And we'll just do that for the rest of them. There we go. So if we want to go through here and rotate the triplanar on the X or the Y, let's say we want to do the Y in 90, or the Z, you can do that. So now this is our substance material. It's got the triplanar node, it's got diffuse all working, so it's fairly straightforward to bring in a substance material, set it up however you'd like it, and then still have the ability to go back in here. Again, just drill down into the diffuse cinema 4D shader, under the shader, under the asset, and then all of these exposed parameters to you, you can change on the fly. So again, if you want to change that concrete spread to be lower, you can knock that down, bring it back up, etc. There's one more thing I want to bring up. I'm going to go in here to Create, Mesh Primitives, Sphere. I'll move this up a little bit here. Let me scale it down. Crank up those segments. So now if I wanted to make a copy of this, let's go ahead and call this one Torus Brick. I can Control drag a copy of this, and we'll call this Sphere Brick. If I take this and drag and drop, it'll have the exact same setup. If I double click on here, it's going to be set up the exact same way as the other one. However, in the Sphere Brick, if I was to go in here and say, you know what, I want to change this one on the Sphere Brick to be a little bit darker, pulling from the same substance, SBSAR, so what you do on one, even if it's a copy of a material, it'll do to the other. So again, changing brick color, or going down here to the concrete spread, it'll go ahead and update them on anything using that substance graph in your scene, which can be helpful if you want consistency between objects. But if you don't, I suppose what you could do is you can just copy paste this one and rename it something different and bring it in as a separate extension Substance Asset Manager. Just go to File, Import with the new different name, bring it in, set it up differently, and then that will call to two separate Substance assets. Now I went ahead and brought in another substance the exact same way. So if I go in here to Extension, Substance Engine, Asset Manager, File, Load Substance, I went ahead and brought in some gecko skin and set up this material the exact same way as we did our brick. Everything plugged in, and the sphere maintains its Redshift geometry displacement. So everything's working as expected. So if I control drag this gecko skin down, I can go ahead and rename this Torus. I'm going to drag this copy onto here. And we already know if I go into this, either one of these, because they're pulling from the same substance. If I go down here and want to change the base color to, like, a little bit redder, I can do that, but it's going to update for both. So if you're just changing the color or any one of these parameters, you could go into, say, the Torus. Again, hit Shift-C. Let's grab a color correct. We'll take our diffuse into the input, and then our out color into the diffuse color. And then on this color correct node, we could do a hue shift. So again, we're pulling from the same substance. We're just going to use a hue shift to kind of shift everything over. You're not going to have access to all these cool things. But again, you know what? Just to test this out, in our folder here, I'm going to just try this. Control to copy, Control paste. We'll go ahead and make a copy of it. Call this test. Extensions, Substance Engine. Let's go in here to File. Let's go ahead and grab that test one we just created. Again, Material, Tools, Convert and Replace. We'll go ahead and drop that onto our sphere. We'll go ahead and set this up real quick. So there we go. We have our original gecko skin, which I'll go ahead and throw on the Torus as well. And then we have our test, which I'll throw on the sphere. And then for the test, we'll go down here. And we'll give this one maybe blue with some really hot red. And then on the original gecko skin, we'll go in here and change this one to a really red with maybe a green. So all you got to do is just rename the substances, bring them in, and rebuild them, and you'll have access to all of these parameters for two separate materials. So that works. And remember, there is tons of, an insane amount of stuff you can pull in that exact same way. However you want to create your Substance Archive file, if you want to do it manually, again, I'll leave a link down here for the Substance Designer Quickstart. If you want to just download it or you want to export it from Painter, feel free to do that too. But again, there's ground, wood, plaster, marble, metal, all sorts of cool stuff you can bring in and apply to your models. Now, if you stuck around for the scene setup, I'll just walk through that really quickly. So we'll just delete everything out of our scene. The first thing we did was go in here to create a mesh primitive torus. And one more time for the setup, make sure you're underneath the render settings, Redshift. And we have our Redshift render view open. So then go in here under lighting, create a dome light. And I'm going to hop in here to my asset browser. I've got a softbox I can drop right into the texture here to light my scene. Let's go ahead and crank that exposure up just a bit. I'm going to go ahead and say create mesh primitive plane. That'll put a plane underneath my object here. Let's go ahead and make sure my tour is here. And we're going to use this as our shadow catcher. So with the plane selected, I'm going to go into scale. I'm just going to pull out here and make sure the plane will encompass wherever my shadows are going to end up. And then with this plane selected, right click, render tags, Redshift object, underneath matte, override, enabled. Turn on apply to secondary rays in case we turn that into glass or something, and then shadow enabled, and that'll be my shadow catcher. So now we're in a Softbox Studio environment. with my torus. If I want to add another light, I can just go in here and say create an area light. I like to go in here to this cameras, use camera as selected objects as camera. So now I can use my camera to dictate where my area light is. So I can go through here and I'm looking through my area light at my object. So I can kind of position it like so. If I need to, I can go down here and change my intensity. And if I want to hop back to my original camera, I can just go in here to cameras, default camera. So I have my area light on here. Of course, if my area light is just blowing out my viewport scene, I can turn it off from my viewports. That's that top one right there. Just turn that to red, just click it. And now it'll still be on for my render. I just won't be blowing out my scene over here. And that's pretty much it. At that point, you would want to go in here and, again, Substance Engine, File, Load Substance. Maybe grab a wood, click the material. Let's change it to a material tools. Convert and replace. Grab that wood, drop it on our torus here. And then any other changes you want to do to this, you'll follow the exact same steps as earlier in the video. Go and get your materials all sorted out, what kind of tiling you want to do, and then remember you can always go in here to your material properties, just kind of drill down into the asset, and then we can go through here and again change any of these properties that we'd like. Again, I could do this all day long. There's so many cool things you could do on here. But the one thing to remember is on anything you want to have a displacement on, remember to right click it, render tags, Redshift object, geometry, add tessellation, and then enable your displacement. So you can go through and crank that up as much as you'd like. And actually, I think the maximum displacement, these might both be set to 1. So depending on the scale of your object, you may need to overcrank this. So that's where you would need to go in here to, give yourself a little breathing room with your maximum displacement, and then your displacement scale, you can go through and you can overcrank the amount of displacement that you want to have on your object. So if you're doing something like very stony outcropping and stuff like that, then feel free to go a little bit nuts with your displacement values.